Here we are. Welcome back to another episode of the DPT to CEO podcast. We are excited to be sharing all of these interviews with you guys, whether you are watching with us here on YouTube or listening on the podcast when this episode comes out. This podcast is for you if you are a physical therapist or other healthcare provider and you are wanting to jump into the world of business and work for yourself. I am loving sharing all of these stories about all the different ways that you can work for yourself as a PT or a healthcare provider and leave the corporate grind behind if you want to. So, if you guys are looking for any guidance on how to do any of this, of course, I have resources at morganmeese.com, but we will also be talking about the resources our special guest has as well. So as we jump into our topics for today, if you guys want to check out any of Ray's resources, we'll have the links in the show notes below. So without further ado, welcome special guest. Thanks for being here, Ray.
Thank you, Morgan. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. I'm excited. Ray and I actually by chance. So I found you, I think I told you on your Instagram ads.
Yeah.
I just started seeing them pop up and I was like, who's this guy? And, the more I followed you and we ended up touching base and everything, we actually have a lot in common about where we lived in the past and stuff, which is so cool. It's a very
ships in the night.
World. I know, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm really excited that we have this opportunity to talk more. And I think, if it's cool with you, we can just kind of get started with your story if you want to tell all our viewers and listeners all about you.
Yeah. How far back you want me to go?
I feel like it's kind of that question, when you ask a patient to give you their past medical history.
Exactly. How deep do you want to go? I'll keep kind of the intro into into PT brief. But for me, I mean, like a lot of PTs, I knew that I knew I wanted to be in the medical realm. I didn't really quite know what I wanted to do, and full transparency, at 18 years old, I was not ready to commit the next 12 years of my life to medical school. And so, I kind of started exploring in PT. And while I was working at a PT clinic, I ended up tearing my ACL. And it really solidified for me, wanting to go down that path and wanting to go down that journey. But one of the things, and I didn't realize this at the time, but one of the things that I did notice was as I was getting to the end phase of my rehab, I really felt like what I was doing at the gym was a lot harder than what I was doing in the physical therapy clinic. And I remember thinking to myself, why am I having to come in here to do these things? Why can't my PT just give me this program and let me communicate with them in a way where I could, do this on my own, right? And I have a strength and conditioning background, so I was a tech. So I did also have some of that skill. And I didn't realize it at the time, but that was kind of the first seed that was planted for me, developing the model that we use today. So fast forward, I go to PT school and I've graduated and I'm an eager new grad, and I think I'm going to make $100,000 out of school because I'm a doctor and I got this expensive piece of paper on the wall. That's what they told me. And I get my first job offer and it's $60,000, right? And I'm like, okay, all right. And I remember talking with my clinical instructor at the time. She was like, if you're comfortable with the clinic, if you know what you're going to, be doing from a patient volume perspective. I didn't work in a mill. I worked in a really good clinic where 2 patients an hour. They gave us time for evals. We only double booked on the last appointment before lunch or at the end of the day. It was very manageable, sustainable, but it still wore me out. Mm-hmm. And I still saw so many flaws in the model. I realized I just wasn't working with the demographic of client that I really wanted to work with. I wasn't working with people like me, which is really who I wanted to help. And that was kind of compounded by, picking up PRN hours at the skilled nursing home. And you're just working so hard to try to make money at that point in your life. And it just kind of left me a little unfulfilled. And I remember one day walking into the clinic, it was 6:30 in the morning. I was going in there to get my notes done early. And I just remember being like, is this what I'm going to do for the rest of my life? Like, is this going to be every single day I'm going to walk into a box and I'm going to stay there and I'm going to do that until I retire? It just didn't make sense to me. And so that night I actually went home. I formed an LLC. I, connected with the gym that I was at. I knew that there was some interest. And I started seeing cash clients at the gym. And I was like, well, if they're going to pay me $50 an hour at the nursing home, why not charge $60 an hour at the gym? I was just drastically undervaluing my services because I didn't understand that part as a business owner. I still had an employee mindset, right? I still had an hourly mindset. Luckily, I got some good advice that convinced me to kind of go up to at least $90 an hour. And then I started to see similar problems in my cash business from a burnout perspective. And I started to see like, oh man, like I'm able to work with clients one-on-one, but like they don't need to come into physical therapy for an hour when they're already doing 5-6 hours of training in the CrossFit facility. And that's when it kind of like I was working with a company where we were doing everything online. And I was like, why don't I mix everything into best of both worlds? And kind of started using what we now call the performance provider growth model, which is our blended model that combines, the high value and high skill things that we can do in person with what we call a prescriptive exercise program that is delivered asynchronously to clients that allows them to kind of not be with a physical therapist in person, but get access to them so they can return back to the activities they love.
I love that. I think it's awesome. I'm already on board.
Yeah, so that was the model creation. And then you go through and you do a couple things here and there. I worked for other people for a while after that. I went and worked in Division I athletics. And then ultimately, like vision of what I wanted to do and the company that I was working with at the time to kind of build some of the online stuff, we really just kind of started to split apart. And it was the best thing. It was one of the hardest and one of the best things that ever happened to me because it created space for me to actually go all in on myself.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And, like I feel like we'll kind of like continue to get into this more, but I think, like one of the highlights from your story so far is something that I feel like a lot of in particular like newer grads, but even like therapists who have been working for 5 or 10 years are like starting to realize, and like what you said before, like, we leave school, we have this degree, we think we're going to work in a clinic slash hospital slash skilled nursing facility like indefinitely, and it's going to
Yeah.
be the best and you're going to make all the money because like you said, that's what they say,
Yeah.
or like it's at least like implied, and like you think that's what's going to happen, but in reality there's a very real chance you're going to find out that there are a lot of things about that you don't really like, and it's okay to look into other options and that there are a lot of other options out there.
And unfortunately, I think that this is an important concept for people either in the workforce or entering the workforce. Like, I didn't really understand how the business of physical therapy worked, right? I assumed it was similar to, like, let's say the physician model. But the reality is, like, for us, we have not really done anything as a profession to get compensated more for being more efficient, right? Everything is so tied to time and codes. Whereas, like, you look at the physician model and it's like, oh, well, if they can do a surgery faster, they're getting paid more, which then means that they can do more surgeries and they can exponentially increase their revenue potential, right? In PT, it's like if you get a client better faster, like that just means another client's getting on your schedule to fill your time, because that's just the deal that we've made with the insurance companies is that we will trade you time for money. So you just have to understand that, I think.
Yeah, I think like just even just like learning a little bit about that, I think gives you or it just like opens your eyes a little bit more like when you are looking for jobs, like if you are like you said like
Yes.
entering the workforce and like looking at different like corporate healthcare positions or what have you, like traditional routes for a physical therapist. It's really important information to have.
Totally. And the volume at which you treat is likely going to be the thing that dictates your earning potential, right? So like for people out there who are saying like, well, why can't I make more money as a physical therapist? Well, because one of two things would have to happen. Reimbursement rates would have to go up. That hasn't happened in who knows how long.
Yeah.
Or the volume of people that you see would have to go up, right? Those are really like the only two mechanisms of revenue generation within the clinic. Or you need to get creative and, bring in a different revenue stream, but that's not really something that a lot of traditional clinics are looking to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, like you said, the more that we understand that, the more that we can either accept like the situation that we're in,
Yeah.
or, what we help physical therapists do is regain control of that and kind of take control of their own destiny. Because when you own your own business, now you've uncapped your earning potential and you have the opportunity to break through that ceiling.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk more about that, Ray.
Which is why we're here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to kind of like go back a little bit to, like the part where you were talking about you yourself working as basically like a cash-based clinic, and you were doing like the one-to-one, and then did you say you started transitioning to like the prescriptive exercise kind of blended model yourself?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So I
Yeah,
was
tell us
I was
about that.
working in my clinic, and I was also working with a company where everything we did was online, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I saw the limitation. I obviously felt the limitations of what I was experiencing in person. And I saw the limitations of what was missing from just that fully remote aspect, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then it just started to click for me where it's like, if I get somebody that comes in with patellar tendinopathy,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like that's in my opinion, a pretty straightforward rehab of loading principles and, return to sport and reintegration of more dynamic, more aggressive movements. Like I just found that there wasn't really a lot that I needed to do in person. Like I didn't
Mm-hmm.
really need to put my hands on that person. And I almost felt like at times I was spinning my wheels to fill the session with volume
Mm-hmm.
that didn't actually feel meaningful.
Mm.
And so in my head, I was like, well, how can I get paid for my skill set? How can I get my time back? And
Mm-hmm.
how can I actually get the client their time back? Right. And we work in a profession where, when a client comes to us and they're in pain, the value of what we do is really high
Mm-hmm.
and the cost of what we do is relatively low, right? Now, the problem that starts to happen is as time goes on, that person feels better, the value starts to creep in on the cost. And once they're out of pain, they feel like they are done. And they're like, well, why am I going to come in and pay you $150, $200 a session? My back doesn't hurt anymore.
Mm-hmm.
The reality that I kind of saw was like, well, but a new problem has arisen in that there is a mismatch between the loading potential of your previously injured tissues and your psychological readiness,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like what you think you're ready to do.
Mm-hmm.
This is clients that go into the gym and they say, I'm just going to take it easy today. I'm just going to test it out and see how it feels. I saw a lot of that with it when I was in Division I athletics. And so I finally kind of figured out that like that's what people meant when they said they were trying to bridge the gap between rehab and performance. Like that is the gap between where your tissues are, where your mindset, you think you are, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And instead of telling somebody, hey, you actually need to come in 3 times a week because we need to load you more frequently, it was like, well, what if I just programmed for you 3 times a week? What
Mm-hmm.
if I gave you the volume to do on your own? Instead of you paying me $200 a session, you paid me $200 a month. Instead of that taking me an hour to do, it took me 30 minutes to do. Well, now I've just converted my effective rate into $400 an hour and I just saved that client $400 a week. That's a pretty big win.
Yeah, for all parties.
So that was kind of like the evolution of how that really started to take off.
Yeah. And I think that's really cool. And like I said, I'm already a fan, already on board. But, like questions that I kind of have, and I'm sure that you feel these questions all the time. With this kind of model, I guess like what kind of patients does it work really well for? Like what kind of patients does it not work well for?
Good question. We generally work with a provider who works in some sort of, buffer of the performance spectrum, right?
Mhm.
Like a lot of our clients, they're in gyms or they partner very closely with gyms. They work with CrossFitters, powerlifters, Olympic weightlifters, runners, triathletes, jujitsu athletes, golfers. They're working with people who are already on the behavior change end of the spectrum, that like they're already committed to being healthy, right?
Mhm.
It's not like you're a lot of the traditional health insurance consumer.
Mhm.
So we find people that are heavily invested in their health, and we really believe that like there's a lot at stake for people when they lose their fitness.
Mhm.
Not just for people who are trying to gain it, but there's a lot at stake for people who lose their fitness, because you never know what fitness actually means to somebody, right? I've worked with people who were ex alcoholics, ex drug addicts, who were suicidal, who, turned their life around from type 2 diabetes, and or saw family members die of heart disease. Like when that's actually what's at stake for somebody, it becomes a more meaningful investment for them.
Sure.
So that's kind of the ideal client for us. Now with our system, we talk about strength balance in some ways, and squat versus deadlift. That can regress all the way back to, a 70-year-old client on a four-wheeled walker, all the way to a CrossFit Games athlete, like if
Mhm.
you understand the system well enough. But as far as like the digital mechanism, it's generally we're using that for, the healthy, active individual who's looking to get back to those kind of things.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense to me, and like that definitely is where my mind is at about like who this would work well for. Because like the other thing that I'm thinking is like with it sounds like the way that as a provider you're working with patients, it's a lot more hands off than the traditional like physical therapy model, with the online programming and everything. And so I'm like thinking like how do we make sure that like our patients are compliant with the program,
Mhm.
in order to
Yeah.
get the results? And like
Yeah.
I feel like there's probably both like aspects on the end of the spectrum where you're already working with somebody and like making sure that they like keep up with the compliance and everything. But it also sounds like there's a lot in like the like sales and marketing of this kind of a service and a program where you are screening people out who are just not going to be a good fit for it anyway, and the
Yeah.
people who do it are much more likely to be compliant as it is just because of who they are.
So a common theme that I've found in myself is I love flexibility. Like I absolutely hate being boxed into this is the way that we do things.
Mhm.
So the model breeds flexibility. My business breeds flexibility. Like everything that I've created as I see this evolution of myself over time has allowed me to be very flexible with how I do things and how I get outcomes and how I get results.
Mhm.
So it's not that this model is more hands off. It's just that this model is only as hands on as it needs to be,
Sure.
right? And so we are not like an anti manual therapy company, an anti manual therapy model. I actually think that's an extremely powerful tool. Whatever you want to say about dependency, I think that's a lot of times where clients see a lot of the value in what we do is like, look, if I went into physical therapy and nobody put their hands on me, I'd be like, why am I here? Right? That's my personal belief. I think that there has to be that hands-on component. I think it's very powerful. Now, I don't think that you can do only manual therapy and get results. I think the right blend of everything is there. So understanding that concept really allows our providers and the clients that we work with to filter out like two things. The biggest things that are qualifiers for going on what we call a prescriptive exercise program or that digital offer is where is the client at on the irritability and the how severe is the nature of their current state, right?
Mhm.
If they have really high irritability, like we're not going to put that person on a digital offer, because we need to make decisions rep by rep, depth by depth. Like there's a more frequent decision making process that comes into play. Now, as that irritability calms down, we can now go into session by session, week by week, right? We're not as
Mhm.
worried about those flare-ups in the moment, that real-time feedback. The second criteria is training IQ. So if I need to teach somebody the skill and I
Mhm.
put them on a virtual offer and they don't know how to do the thing that I'm asking them to do, that would be a disqualifier. So
Sure.
the thought process is that, as the process goes along, as time goes along, irritability and severability are going down, and training IQ is going up, and so they become more and more appropriate for this process that we put them on.
I love that. Something I have to just say, Ray, like something that I think is really unique about the way that you approach kind of like business coaching for physical therapists is it has a clinical element to it. And I feel like that's
Yes.
something that I really see all that often, with all the options that are out there for,
Correct.
coaching and consulting for PTs. And I admire that a lot.
Thank you.
Like I think it's important, and like I always like share with people too, like as a physical therapy practice owner myself, like I work with CrossFitters and in the pelvic health
Mhm.
realm. So, like if you are a physical therapist and you want to work in those areas, it is a benefit to you to work with a coach who can discuss with you clinical situations.
You
um
Yeah, you've gotta have a system, right?
yeah.
Like, I think that, it's like, it's funny, I'm sure you've seen this as well, but we go through this pendulum swing of everything matters and nothing matters. What we need to figure out is actually, like, what matters right now, right? And we've gotta have a filtering system for that. And so I love that you brought this up, because one of the things that I do think makes us unique is the fact that, part of our business model is actually the clinical and client management model that we teach, because we have to teach you, how do you collect the data from the assessment? How do you easily turn that data into a prescriptive exercise program? How do you know when your client has enough capacity to return to sport, to go to this next progression, to get back on the field, to get back in the gym, to deadlift 300 pounds again? Like, we have to teach you the system around that. And I think what's kind of happened is, I've seen this on Instagram, on the interwebs, is everybody's like, you don't need a system, like you need these principles, but like nobody actually knows what that means, right? Nobody actually knows like the decision making criteria that goes into these things. And
Yeah.
like, yeah, you need principles, but you also need some decision making criteria that back those things up. You need to
Mhm.
know, do I need to progress this person? Do I need to regress this person? Do I need to give them more time to adapt, right? Like, we can't just load it, bro, on everything
Yeah.
and, hope for the best. Like, it just doesn't work like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's nice to have a system. It's nice to have a system for everything, because then it's gonna make your life a lot easier and the results a lot better.
Correct, correct. It just takes a lot of the confusion and guesswork, and I feel like now I'm noticing less and less confidence in providers that are coming out.
Mm.
And I don't yet know what the cause of that is. I
Mhm.
definitely think some of the things that we see online are the cause of that, that like it almost makes you feel like you need something esoteric, like you have to achieve this thing to become the expert, like you have to go get this residency, you have to go get this certification. The reality is, you got to get in the trenches, get your hands dirty, and do the thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and like we were just talking about like before we got on the interview today too, like everything's going to be an experiment,
100%.
like in school, like you learn all this stuff, and then like in your job, you keep learning more stuff, and you can pursue certifications and other courses and more letters and like all the things. But like at the end of the day, like you're never going to feel, like you said, like the expert. like you're ready or whatever, you know, until you try the thing and then
Yeah.
you have experience to back up your knowledge, I guess. As even if you're totally wrong, like whatever your hypothesis was, you'll have
Yeah.
experience to say like, here's why I was 100% wrong and we're going to do things differently. Yeah, and that's important to remember.
Well, people don't understand how valuable that lesson is, right? And so what we tend to see is this continuous over preparation, this hyper analysis, this suit for perfection before you launch, not realizing that like no matter how perfect your plan is, there are going to be audibles and adaptations that have to come along the way.
Yeah.
So instead of trying to make something perfect and then it doesn't work anyways, let's get it to 80%. Let's put it out there. Let's see what happens, because every minute, every day, every week, every month that passes has an opportunity cost with it.
Mhm.
And I've never met somebody who has opened their business and said like, I wish I would have waited another year. I wish I would have waited.
Never.
Like I've just
Yeah.
never met anybody who said that. And something that I've started to kind of study within our clients, you know, the clients that work with Engage Movement, is like, what are the things that kind of that make the people who get success the fastest? Like, what are some of the attributes that those people have? And it really comes down to that like experimentation and implementation. Are you willing to try
Mhm.
before you're certain what the answer is going to be? That's a key criteria.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I love that you guys are like taking a look at those like characteristics and criteria, because that's been something that I've been trying to study as well the past couple of
Yeah.
years. And like I think that those are really important things to like bring up whenever you're talking to somebody about potentially starting their own practice or their own business. Like, you know, these are the key factors that I've seen in our most successful, you know, students or whatever it is. How do you feel about those factors? And like
Yeah.
that, the willingness to try, even though you're like, I only know 50% of what I feel like I need to know. I'm gonna try it and see what happens. And then being like relentless about the trying
Yes.
continuously.
I remember when I was going through some sales training, I was so scared, so nervous to, you know, go into these role plays and really just like look like an idiot because you freeze,
Yeah.
right? Like that's what I was scared of. But I
Mhm.
knew if I didn't do that, I would never improve my skill.
Right.
And so the thing for me was like, okay, I am willing to implement the things that I've learned, and I'm actually willing to lose the next 3 sales so that I can have a higher chance to help the next 100 people commit. And it's that, you know, everybody talks about like that, you have to delay gratification. That's delaying gratification.
Mhm.
But the problem is when people try once and fail, they will default back to what they were doing, even though what they were doing wasn't working. So it's like you have to get over what we call like those expected roadblocks. Like you have to get past those expected roadblocks if you're really going to, you know, make anything beneficial for yourself, for your business, or for your personal growth.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like it, like the thing that I wanted to come back to that you had mentioned before that I think kind of goes along with this is the like phrase opportunity cost. And I
Mhm.
would love to talk a little bit more about that, you know, and hear from you on that. I think that would be really important for our listeners to hear about, like if they're in a place where they're feeling like afraid of starting, afraid of failing, you know, and they're feeling like stuck. I think it's very common for some of that fear to be like, I'm afraid to invest money into this business. I'm afraid
Mm,
to invest time into this business. I'm
yeah.
afraid to try a thing and post a video and then somebody thinks I look dumb, and they get very like stuck kind of in this like one dimension like around that fear. But I think it like takes it to a next level to become aware of this concept of opportunity cost. Can you speak to that a little bit more?
I've got a good story on this of
Okay.
the moment it clicked for me. At one point, I was working in Division One athletics, another great clinic. Right, I was paid hourly, and I've gotten really lucky in my career that every job I've had has honestly been great. It's mostly like me, just like I need more, I need to do more, right? I know that there's a lot of horror stories out there for people, but there was a day where like my mindset changed and I was walking in and I would work a 10-hour day and I was like, man, I'm going to be in here for 10 hours. I'm going to make $400. And then I was like, I would only need to see 3 clients at my clinic to make $450. At that time, I was charging $150 an hour. And then I was like, if I do the math on that, I could be making X amount. I don't remember what the number was. And the thing for me that clicked was like, in that moment, I shifted from my job being a revenue generating strategy to my job was actually costing me money, right? So to me, like the opportunity cost was every hour that I was in there wasn't making me $40. It was costing me 90. And every 10 hours I was in there was costing me 6.5 hours of my time if I wanted to make the same amount of money. So if you have $200,000 earning potential per year, which I don't think is crazy for a solopreneur to have, right? A solopreneur in business, and you are settling for $65,000, $75,000, the delta between where you are and where you want to be is your opportunity cost, right? Now, the thing that you need to close that gap isn't just being a good physical therapist. That is not enough. Sorry to break it to you guys. And for most of you that are probably listening to this, you are probably listening because you already feel like you are a better therapist than most people out there. And you don't need to feel bad about that, right? You feel like you go above and beyond. You feel like you deliver more value than other therapists. You feel like you are underserving your potential when you're in the clinic. You don't need more skill. You need different skills to figure out how to sell that skill. So whenever somebody is waiting, like everything's getting more expensive, right? If people don't enroll with us this year, our program will be more expensive next year. Opportunity cost. If you have an opportunity to go do something with a cool organization and you say no, opportunity cost. Like at some point you've got to realize that maybe the thing that's costing you is actually what you're doing right now.
Yeah. And I think that's like a really, really powerful way to put it. And I hope that everybody listening goes back and listens to that again, that part about opportunity cost, because it's true. Like we get like so wrapped up in just like the fear about like what could happen. Like this is something that I always bring up to people. Everybody's always like, I'm afraid of, I invest the money and I don't get a return on it, which I feel like even if you try a little bit, you're probably going to break even. At the very least, you're going to break even. What if I try and I don't like it? What if it takes up a bunch of my time? What if my boss finds out that I'm working for myself? Like just all these like little things. And we're always worried about like, what is the worst thing that could happen? And then I'm always like, well, what is the best thing that could happen actually? And like, why are you delaying it? Like, don't you owe it to yourself to see like what is the best possible like version of me in my life that I could have? Because even if it falls somewhere in the middle between like the worst and the best thing, it's still better than where you are now.
The thing that I like to ask people is like, that's interesting. What would you need to do for this to not work? And they'll say like, oh, well, I guess I like wouldn't show up to the calls. I wouldn't implement the things. Are you going to do that? And they're like, well, no, I'm going to put in the work. So then why wouldn't it work? Like, it's so funny when you work them through that reverse logic of like, yeah, look, it's not going to work if you don't do the things, if you don't take the risks, if you don't take the chance. But like, we talk about this for our clients that like one of the things that we literally say when we are onboarding somebody is like, you've got to come on with a do what it takes mentality. And that means that your business isn't going to fail. That means that you will figure it out and you will have support in order to help you figure it out. I think the real fear for people in investing is, I think in a lot of cases, they don't actually understand how to best be coached, right? Because they're so used to showing up to practices and being told what to do.
Mm-hmm.
But when you get into business mentorship, when you get into business consulting, when you're working with somebody at that capacity, the reason why I am so successful working with my coaches is not because they coach me, it is because I bring things to be coached on.
Yeah.
So I always show up to a meeting with my coach and say, hey, this is what's happening. This is what I'm thinking about doing. Poke holes in it, or let me know if you think I'm missing something. Like at the end of the day, they're just facilitating me doing the thing myself. Like that's really the power of coaching. And so something I've noticed in my business is there is a direct correlation to revenue trajectory when I am paying somebody to coach me versus when I am not.
Mm.
And I think it has to do with the fact that like when I have something on the books that I need to show up prepared for,
Mm-hmm.
it constantly keeps me moving in the
Mm-hmm.
right direction. So like I tell people all the time, like, look, like I'm constantly putting my money where my mouth is, because how could I ask you to invest in coaching when I'm not investing in coaching, when I'm not investing in my skill set?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, like I think people are just, I also think people are generally like kind of scared of success in a subconscious way. I
Yeah.
think they're scared of how they're going to be perceived. I think they're scared of asking for money. And I think that they're more comfortable altruistically sacrificing themselves than taking the chance.
Yeah. And dear listener out there, I think this is definitely something to internalize and maybe journal about tomorrow and kind of
Yeah.
talk to yourself about. Because it's a really interesting concept, because it's like you have to become a different version of yourself to have
Yes.
like a different life. You have to do something differently if you want to have something different. And that's scary. It's
Yeah.
unknown.
Imagine you were working with a patient and they were saying, well, I want to change, but I don't want to stop doing anything that I'm doing, right? We have to get them to understand that the reason why they are in this situation is because of the decisions that they're making based on their current perspective. So the fit person didn't get fit by thinking about being fit. They got fit by behaving like a fit person.
Mm-hmm.
They started eating better. They started going to the gym. They started upping their step count. They started lifting weights. They stopped drinking soda. They stopped binge drinking on the weekends, right? They
Mm-hmm.
had to start acting like the future version of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So a good exercise is like, well, how does the future version of myself behave when they are presented with an offer for support that includes a monetary exchange? Do they go and think about it, or do they act on it? Do they go back to safety, or do they jump into the unknown because they know that's where the upside is? Like you can start to figure out, how does the future version of yourself, like for example, your program is DPT to CEO.
Yeah.
You have to behave very differently when you are the CEO of your business, when you're the
Yeah.
CEO of your life, right? How does the
Mhm.
CEO that you want to be actually behave? Now go start being that person.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I like this title so much.
It's a good
But
one. It's a good one.
thank you. It reminds me of, I'm trying to think of this quote, but it's something about like be, do, have, but you have to do things in the opposite way. And I hate that I can't remember it exactly, but essentially like going along with what you're saying about like you're never going to become who you want to be until you start like doing the things that that person would do. And you have the ability and the power and the control to start doing some of those things right now. And eventually, by taking those actions, you'll become who you want to be. Yeah.
And you can start small. When your partner asks you what you want for dinner, instead of saying, I don't know, what do you want? Say what you want. I know that that like doesn't seem like a lot, but what it does is it starts to make you a decisive person. So if you feel like you are an indecisive person, start making decisions. If you feel like you're somebody who always needs to think about things, maybe you're at a store and you see a shirt that you like, you're like, oh, I'll think about it, I'll come back later. Like buy it,
Yeah.
right? Because how many times have you come back and now they're sold out of your size? Like there are small little things like that that will trigger the same nervous system response as a big decision, right? Like
Mhm.
I know for me, to this day, when I get hit with okay, here's the invoice for coaching from a first experience, just like everybody else, I get that little weird pit in my stomach, just like everybody else. Now, the difference is I know the exercise for me is going through with paying that invoice, signing up for the thing, investing in the coaching because it's what I said I wanted. And by that time, I am committed to making the change. Like there's small ways that you can start nudging your discomfort, your comfort zone so you can grow and expand.
Yeah, and like I definitely believe that with all of that, like I know a lot of us therapists, like we always talk about we want to work with motivated clients. Motivated patients is always like
I
where
just
it
want them to
starts.
sign up. I just want them to
Right.
find me and sign up. I don't want to have to do any convincing.
Yeah, and I'm just like, well, I think it starts with you because like you yourself have to have that kind of energy with conducting yourself in your own life where you're
Mhm.
willing to take initiative, you're willing to pay for things, you're willing to commit. And when you give off that vibe, like you were saying, where you're somebody who's decisive, you're somebody who puts in the work to do things and make change, you will attract those kinds of clients.
Mhm.
So,
Or they will borrow that authority from you, right? Like
yeah,
that's another thing too is like sometimes you have to help people be like, look, like you're not here because I need you to work with me. You're here because you need help. And we can be the vehicle for help only if you allow it. And only if you're actually committed to making the change that's required once you say yes. Because we get to a lot of, I know one thing that we talked about was like this concept of objection handling, but like if I don't have somebody that is actually committed to making a change, navigating their objections doesn't matter.
yeah.
Right? So it's like timeout. Like, are you committed to making this change?
Hmm.
Yes. Then let's just figure out the rest.
Yeah.
Right? Because that means I can help you. Like, it doesn't even matter talking about money if the answer to that is no.
Yeah, I love that. And I think like it's something that is really, really important to bring up whenever you are, having a conversation with somebody about working together, whether it's like in this realm of business coaching or as a physical therapist or a healthcare
Mhm.
provider. I love asking that question. Like something that I'll say is like, okay, so we're getting to the end of our conversation. It seems like we might be a good fit to work together, but based on what we've talked about and based on what you know about XYZ service that I provide
Yeah.
on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being like 100%, how good of a fit does this service feel like for your problem and for what you're looking for? And if it's a 2,
Yeah.
then
Yeah. Okay.
that's
No
like,
big
okay,
deal.
great.
Yeah.
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 Like let me help you find somebody else.
Yeah.
And like making sure that there is that like right fit and there is that like sense of urgency and commitment from the client is really important for a good experience for everybody involved. This is such a good discussion, Ray.
Well, I appreciate the great questions. It is a good
Uh,
discussion, though. I appreciate it.
one thing that I want to make sure that I ask you because I know everybody is going to ask about it, and I wanted to connect it a little bit to the fear piece.
Yeah.
But when it comes to working with clients in an online capacity, one of the most common like worries that I hear is, "What about state lines, Ray? What do I do with that with my
What
license?"
about it? Okay. So, couple things, right? First off, most of our clients are working with clients that like they are building the virtual side of their business based off of the in-person aspect of their business, right? And one thing I do want to say is like, look, I know that there's a lot of these like build your online business. It's so easy. Here's the dream. Like building an online business is hard. It takes time. There's a long runway to meaningful revenue. It is massively condensed when you can develop that from a local epicenter, right? So like we are just straight up with people. Like if we work with somebody who is fully online, there's pretty strict criteria that they have to have for us to even want to help them or
Mhm.
even just make it worth their time, their investment, because it can be frustrating on both ends. So I want to put that out there. Secondly, and this is not legal advice, but the biggest thing that matters is your words. How are you positioning your offer How are you coming in and working as that person, right? I used to work with people all over the world, all over the world, all over the US. I was not their physical therapist. I was a physical therapist who provided a performance and wellness service to them that was coaching, right? We are not the only profession that does that. I've got a
Mhm.
buddy who is an attorney. He's my attorney,
Mhm.
right? He's like, yeah, we used to do this. We used to go to Florida and we used to coach people on real estate of like what we would do. We were not legally counseling them as their attorney. We were coaching them on the process. So I actually have a training or a conversation that I did for this with a lawyer. I'd be happy to figure out how we get that to your followers. They can DM
Yeah.
me and I can always send it to them. But we talk about this exact concept. And so really it's all about like, how are you positioning the service? You know, I like to say, look, as a physical therapist, the main goal is to get you out of pain. As a performance and wellness side, the goal is to manipulate exercise in a smart, methodical way where the byproduct in a lot of cases happens to be you no longer having pain. Like that's a big differentiating factor,
Yeah.
right? So be very, very careful with your language and the way that you position the offer. And I really like that byproduct approach.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense, and like something that I always suggest to everybody is to have like a written down policy, like if you are
Yeah.
providing, even multiple different services, whether
Yep.
they're, in an online format or not, like written down policy of this is what constitutes physical therapy, here's why, here's what it's not, and like whatever wellness performance service, this is what it is. Here is what it is, definitely not physical therapy, and
Yeah.
like you have to have certain criteria as a client to be on the PT side or the performance side or whatever it is, so that you have it to refer to and you're not always just trying to make decisions about that like on the fly with anybody that you talk
Correct.
to.
Yeah,
Um,
and our clients do get access to a sample suite of documents, that I've used in the past as well.
Perfect. We love
Yeah.
templates.
Yeah.
Very helpful. Okay, and I think we're kind of coming down to the end of our time today. And I think one of the last questions that I had for you is kind of like pros and cons. So for everybody who's listening to this podcast or checking out this video on YouTube, there are either people who are thinking about starting a practice or they're already in it.
Mhm.
What do you feel like are your like favorite parts about working for yourself and your least favorite parts? Like what are the pros and cons for you?
My favorite part is being in control of the headaches that I create for myself.
Uh-huh.
And I think that a lot of people think owning your business is really stressful. I don't really get a lot of stress from owning my business. I think it's because I am in control. So like that was super beneficial for me where like I've worked for companies where I made a lot of money and I had 10 times, 20 times more stress and I was miserable. And so for me, it's like really having that control back
Mhm.
and not having other people create headaches for me is
Mhm.
very, very that's something that I really enjoy. The part that took me the longest to figure out, and I
Mhm.
think that this is something that a lot of people struggle with, is like nobody's going to give you a checklist of what needs to be done.
Mhm.
Because on any given day, where you are in the process, you have to be a little bit more flexible. You have to be a little bit more adaptable. And it's not like when you walk into the clinic and it's like, turn on the lights, start up the computers, go check the hydroculator, go, make sure this is all good. And then your patients just start coming in and you go through your day. Like you have to create that structure for yourself. You
Mm-hmm.
have to create boundaries for yourself, right? I am not a hustle and grind 60-hour work weeks, sacrifice my weekends, sacrifice my evenings. Just not my style. That's not how we want our clients to be either.
Mm-hmm.
I am very much comfortable with just a longer runway and maintaining that peace for myself. So I think really like establishing those boundaries is something that is initially hard, but will be the most beneficial thing that you can do within your business. Yeah, nothing else. And the only other thing that really drains me is like just like building out our systems and like doing my budgeting stuff.
Yeah. Like,
So
yeah.
yeah, it's like, but I just have to do some of those things, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And for all of the pros that are associated with this whole thing, it's definitely worthwhile to have to deal with those little things.
1000%. I'll take that any day of the week.
Yeah.
So
And I love that you brought up the structure piece too, because that's something that I've been trying to make a little bit more content about because it's a huge transition to go from, working full time for somebody
yeah,
else where the structure is made for you to having to do it on your own and also maintain the structure
yeah,
yourself. Like it always just feels like to me almost like I'm like training a muscle like to get
you are.
stronger,
You want
Yeah.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
just committing to yourself is trainable. So,
You 100%. And when just like in the gym, if you fall off one day, it doesn't mean that you are done. It's just like next week, get back to your routine and
yeah,
let that routine become consistent with you and just be okay being a little bit more flexible, a little bit more adaptable.
yeah, everything will be fine.
It will
It'll
be. It
all be fine.
will be.
Okay, and then last thing for today, tell us a little bit more about what you have going on to promote in your business, Ray, and where people can find you.
Yeah, so we've got a ton of information and resources over at engagemovement.com. You can find everything from, a little business starter checklist to free trainings to other podcasts that we've been on if you want to learn a little bit more. And if you're really wanting to learn more about what we do, make sure you check out our programs page and you can find out about what we call the performance provider growth model. And that's really our system and our model of client management that allows you to blend your in person and virtual services. So ultimately, you can make more money in less time. And the ultimate mission for our company is to make sure that we can keep great providers in the profession. So if you're somebody who's feeling burnt out, if you're feeling like, this profession has left you wanting a little bit more, and you have that entrepreneurial itch, check our stuff out and see if what we have to offer kind of fits what you're looking to do.
Awesome. Cool. And we'll make sure all the links are down below so you guys can check them out. But otherwise, hope this episode and the discussion was as eye-opening as it was for me. I think it was great stuff to talk about. And thank you so much for being here today, Ray.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Morgan.
Yeah. Okay. All right, everybody. We will see you on the next episode.